Now, we all know that we were under the Mughal rule, and then the Britishers came to India. How did they come to India? They came through the East India Company, right? They came as traders, right? And then they eventually ruled over us as a colony for more than 350 years, close to 350 years. They came during the later part of the 17th century, during the towards the end of 1600s, somewhere around that time. And then they first started doing trading only, and then they took up a lot of military. They went to wars and all. There was military, there was political, and there was civil administration also, which was carried out by the company, apart from its commercial activities. What do you mean by commercial activity? Buying and selling. So they primarily came here to buy cotton from here, to cultivate tea here, to cultivate jute here, export it to their country, which was undergoing industrial revolution at that point of time. So they made finished products, clothes and fabric and other things, and then they sold it throughout the world, including the Indian subcontinent, isn't it? And for that they started controlling the various countries that they were setting up shop in. So till 1773, there was no act. The East India Company, so East India Company is like any other company. Today you have Reliance, you have Tatas, you have Birlas, you have Ambanis, you have Adanis, TVS Group. So like any other company, it had its board of directors and they were taking all the decisions. But then in 1773, what happened? The first act of the British for regulating the affairs of the East India Company was enacted. Please remember, guys, all these acts that we are going to discuss now, starting from the Regulating Act of 1773 till the Government of India Act of 1935. Where were all these enacted? Enacting means what? Passing a law. You would have seen in the newspaper, government passed the Citizenship Amendment Act, government passed the act for labor laws, the government passed this act, the government passed the RTA Modification Act, the government passed the Jammu and Kashmir Act, right? All this is happening in Indian Parliament now, because the Indian Parliament derives its powers from the Constitution. All these regulating acts 1773 till Government of India Act 1935, where were these enacted? These were not enacted in India. These were enacted, which means these were passed by the British Parliament in London. The Britishers passed these laws in their Parliament, which was used for regulating and governing our country. So now, these set of acts can be seen as pre-1858, post-1858. Now what is the significance of the year 1858? 1857 was the first war of independence, the Sepoy Mutiny, right? Again, as I told you guys, all the historical background, the historical importance of all these things will be covered in your history class. I am going to discuss it only primarily from the governance perspective, right? And how it shaped the governance and the constitutional mechanism in our country. So 1857, so before 1857, the company had a role in the administration, in the governance. When I say company, it is East India Company. But after 1857, starting from the Government of India Act 1858, the entire Indian administration was directly brought under the Crown. Crown means what? Crown means the British King. Guys, again, you will read it in your textbooks, you will read it in our academy material, you will hear these terms. Please remember, after 2-3 weeks, once you get used to it, you will not have any doubts about it. But in the beginning itself, you should have clarity. British Crown and the British government are one and the same. See, because earlier, till the 16th century, the king in Britain was the main authority, right? After the 12th, 13th century itself, the king started losing his power, but he still controlled a lot of things. But starting from the 17th century, or rather the 18th century, beginning of the 18th century, the king became just a nominal head. But he is still the head of that country, head of that state, the king. Nominal means what? Just like we have President of India. All of us know Mr. Ramnath Kovind is the President of India. He is the first citizen of the country. He is the head of the union executive. We will discuss all that when we discuss Indian constitution. He is the head of our Indian state, right? But he is only a nominal head. Nominal means just figurative, just for namesake. He doesn't have any powers of his own. He just goes by the advice given to him by the real powers. Real powers is who? Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers. So we have modeled it just on the British system. So in Britain also you call it the British crown or the king. When the king is not there, queen. Now the king is not there, Queen Elizabeth is there, who is the head of that state. After Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles will become King Charles. So they are the nominal heads. So they are called as the British crown because all the orders of the government will be taken out in their name. But who is the real power in Britain? The Prime Minister, Mr. Boris Johnson and his cabinet colleagues now. Like that, starting from the beginning of the 18th century itself, the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers are the real heads. So the administration was brought under the crown means it was brought under the British government. Right? So you should be clear about that. So from 1858, it was directly brought under the British government. The company ceased to exist. Right? So that is the significance of pre-1858 and post-1858. Guys, as I again told you, this is all for understanding. I am going to tell you various details about the act. At the end of wondering, how am I going to remember all this? Don't worry. You will be able to remember all this only by revising. But my job is to ensure that I prepare flowcharts and tables at the end of each class for the points that we are discussing so that it is easy for you to remember. As we go along, you will understand that style and I am sure you will be able to follow it also. So pre-1858, what was the first act that came into being or that was there? The Regulating Act of 1773, right? So what is the importance of this Regulating Act of 1773? It was the first step by the British government to regulate the affairs of East India Company. So because that the East India Company was doing it based on the decisions taken by their board of directors and all. But the British government felt no, because there was financial crisis in that company. The company had asked for some £2 million, if I am not wrong, of loan from the British government. There was a famine in Bengal. Right, there was a lot of deaths, there was anger against the company administration of the local people. So in order to control all this, they wanted to regulate the affairs of the East India Company. So they passed this act. That is why this act is called as Regulating Act, because it is to regulate the affairs of East India Company. Right? So the governor of Bengal, right, Britishers again, one more term which you should be aware of. So India were ruled by the British, but till independence there were certain areas which were called as provinces. What do you mean by provinces? Whatever we call as states now. You have Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana, Kerala, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh. So these were called as provinces before independence. The Madras province, the Bombay province, the Bengal province, the northwestern frontier province, which is today's Pakistan, the northeastern frontier province, which is all the northeastern states today, the central provinces, which is nothing but Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and all of today, the united provinces, which is nothing but the Uttar Pradesh, parts of Bihar, all those areas, right? So there were some 10 to 12 provinces and slightly more also at various points of time. So here in these provinces, the British had direct control. Land revenue, administration, everything was under the British government. Significant part of this country was under these provinces. Earlier they were presidencies and then they became provinces. But apart from this, there were also princely states. Now what do you mean by princely states? These were small kingdoms. Mysore was a princely state. Travancore, parts of Kerala, was a princely state. Baroda was a princely state. Jammu and Kashmir was a princely state. Hyderabad was a princely state. Lucknow was a princely state. Gwalior was a princely state. Right? So various parts of the country, there were princely states. Now these princely states were also under the overall control of the British. Right? So they cannot go against the British. but they paid taxes to the British government for giving them security and all that. But below that, the local administration, the local regulations and all were left to the respective kings, right? So we had 10, 12 or around 15 provinces at various points of time, and I think at the end of, during the time of independence it was around 12 or 14 provinces that we had, very large provinces, and we had more than 540 princely states, and all of them amalgamated and we formed Indian Union in 1950. They were all under the British, but their level of administration, the type of administration, for British provinces it was directly under the British rule, whereas for the princely states it was under the British rule for security and defense, but below that the administration were taken care of by the local kings. So in 1773 there was a presidency of Bengal, it had its own governor. There was a presidency of Madras, it had its own governor. There was a presidency of Bombay, it had its own governor. But for the first time, the governor of Bengal was redesignated as Governor General of Presidency of Fort William, right? And who was the first Governor General in India? Guys, everyone comes and asks me this doubt at the end of this class and even after that. Sir, who was the first Governor General of India, sir? Now, it is a very, it is that preposition which makes all the difference. Who was the first Governor General in India? Warren Hastings, based on Regulating Act of 1773. He was the Governor General of the Presidency of Fort William in Bengal. But the other presidencies, for some of the aspects, were brought under the control of Governor General of the Presidency of Fort William. So he was the first Governor General in India. But the first Governor General of British India as a whole, based on the Charter Act of 1833, was Lord William Bentinck.